Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Robin Ayub. I'm the founder of the Localization Fireside Chat podcast channel. This relatively young platform has given me and the audience an incredible opportunity to listen to the thought leaders, industry professionals, tell their stories and intriguing stories, how they get into the localization industry, and also talk about some of the trends in our industry, challenges, innovations. So if you have not done so already, and I invite you to connect with me by looking me up on LinkedIn, or connect with our channel by liking these YouTube videos and podcast episodes that we put out once a week. We record on Friday and we publish on Tuesday. So once a week, we have a fresh new episode that is being launched with one of our thought leaders in our industry. Today, I have the honor and privilege to be joined by my friend and colleague and an industry leader, Florian Fass. And Florian is the managing director of Slator, which Slator doesn't need any introduction, but Florian is based in Zurich. He spent a decade or so in Asia before co-founding Slator in 2015. Slator is a leading source of news, research, and for global translation and localization and language technology industry. Also, Slator's advisory practice provides independent industry analysis to sell and buy M&A and custom market research. Florian, welcome to the show. Welcome to the episode this morning. I really appreciate your time with me, taking the time with me this morning. And I want to start by asking you to tell your story. Now, I gave you a little bit of a bio for you. Obviously, it's not conclusive. There's a lot more to be said there. And you and I go back a little ways. So by your own words, if you don't mind, let's get started by saying, how did you get into the localization industry?
That's a good question. And thanks so much for having me on, Robin. Really, really appreciate it. And congrats on the Localization Fireside Chat, the channel. Great to see more podcasts in the industry. I think we have a lot of catch up to do compared to some of the other industries. So it's great to be here. How did I get into the localization industry? A bit of an accident. It's actually quite a kind of succinct anecdote, I guess. So I used to be, I trained as an electrician in kind of the Swiss apprenticeship system that like most of the young people go through. From 16 to 20, 21, like you do like a 3-4 year apprenticeship. And I was the trained electrician, but I'm really not talented like in manual labor. So, after 4 or 5, I guess I worked 6 years in the trade. I was like, I don't see myself doing this for another 40 years. And I don't see myself advancing into some kind of engineering job, right? So you could kind of move on and become like an engineer, maybe work in an office at someday as opposed to the construction side. Anyway, so I saw this brochure on a friend's table about a translation school. At the time, it was literally called the Translation Interpreter School, the DOTS here in Zurich. And I'm like, that sounds interesting. And I, was traveling and I like languages, tried, learn some Spanish, was practicing my English, etc. So I'm like, well, that sounds interesting. And there was a particular twist to it because this particular school had like an exemption for people that had a particular level of Spanish and English, so they didn't need a certain other degree. It's quite technical in Switzerland. Anyway, so I saw that brochure. I'm like, well, that sounds interesting. I looked up how I can apply. And then I'm like, okay, I'm going to get this and this certificate in Spanish and English. And then I did apply and I got in. That was like way back about it's over 20 years ago. And then I trained as a translator. And, we can maybe talk about some of the next steps there, but trained as a translator, got hired after the translation, getting a translation degree, got hired by a company that we then worked together at CLS Communication. They sent me to Asia. And then, we can maybe talk about some of the rest. But it was a brochure that was lying around and I was thinking, well, maybe that sounds interesting.
Well, excellent. Most of these stories that I'm hearing, it is similar to yours, and I know I've shared with you how I started. I remember, you remember Larry Rogers, right? So
absolutely,
yeah. So our good friend Larry was traveling from Toronto to Moncton, New Brunswick, where I lived at the time. And I happened to be sitting beside him on a plane going back home. I remember telling the story a million times. I said, 2 hours later flight, he convinced me to go work for an industry I didn't know existed. I'm a technologist by background, as you already know. And first day on the job, I asked Larry, I says, what would you like me to do again? What do you guys sell? And he said, we take a content or a word, by his own words, quote unquote. We take a word from one language, put it into another language. Now you go sell that. And so the world has advanced in 21 years, much faster than, taking a word from one language, put it into another language. Is not as simple as that. We realize that now. For you, there was a second side to that story. After you came back, I think you came back from Asia and you went through some soul searching. I don't know what you want to call it. How did Slator came about? So can you tell the story, Slater? Slater doesn't need an introduction, but I don't think many people know like how the idea came about and why did that came about? Like what drove you to, must have had a void in the industry that you wanted to fill. And here comes Slater.
It has something to do with sales, actually, because I was when I was in Asia, I was head of the region. In the end, that was my role there. We had 4 offices: Singapore, Hong Kong, Shanghai, and a small one in Beijing. And basically, my job was mostly business development and sales, right? So I went to all of these conferences, like where our clients were, the leads were, right? The banking conference, the legal conference, the life sciences conferences. And we also advertised like online and in actually some print magazines there. And I was at some point, I was like, well, why isn't there like a website where I can get information about my own industry? Like there was Common Sense, but it was all kind of paywalled and only the CEO had a subscription, right? And I was like, why isn't there anything where like I, as the casual, busy business user, can kind of get day-to-day info, and so that was kind of the spark. That was maybe around 2013 when I was still based in China. And we did advertise. We had a contra deal with Asia Legal Business, which was Asia Legal Business. It was about, basically targeting lawyers as readers and in-house counsels in Asia. And so we would translate the magazine, which was the best possible advertisement for us because we got our best legal translators to translate it. It was basically English and Chinese, bilingual. And then every time we would pitch a lawyer, we would basically open the meeting by, hey, here is the Asia Legal Business magazine and it's translated. And we actually got a byline at the end of the magazine, right? Yeah. So the publisher of this magazine was Andrew Smart, who ended up being the co-founder of Slater. So, I was like, well, when I kind of the idea germinated there, I was like, well, I need somebody with media experience, and Andrew brought that media experience and I brought the industry experience. And that's how we ended up co-founding Slater. We didn't actually go for the print version because that looked a bit outdated even back in 2016, 2015. But we spun up the website and we went live in 2015. And that was about a year, about 6 months, probably after I came back to Switzerland from China. It took about 6 months to get it online. Yeah, so that's the backstory to that. I just went to all of these conferences that had nothing to do with translation. I was the translation guy going into the conference. I was, well, why isn't there anything like that I can get updated on? And that's how it happened.
So another question, if you don't mind, digging a little into that. So what does the Slater word means? Is there like an abbreviation for it, or does it mean anything?
Translator.
Oh, Slater. So you
cut it off at an unusual place. Oh, that's a whole other story. You don't want to know all the other names we were contemplating.
Normally those are the interesting story. How did you come up with the name, and where the name came from?
So that one, the story was we had a range of terrible, horrible names, and I'm so glad we didn't choose any of those and actually spend a bit of time finding something better like Slater, which, obviously has a connection to the translation industry. But I didn't come up with it myself. I actually posted it on, at the time, I think it was Odesk. Like, I don't know what it's called today, Upwork. So I'm like, hey, I've got this idea. Can somebody give me 10 ideas? And I think I spent like $200 and some freelancer got back with 10 ideas and Slater was one of them. I'm like, that's it. Right. Because she cut a lot of words that were like language related at an unusual, position. And that one like resonated, and I checked, and unfortunately the domain name was taken. So Slater.com. I mean, Slater it's an unusual spelling also of the name Slater, like Christian Slater with an E. So there is a few Slaters with an O out there, like an English surname. So some Slater at some point bought that domain, ended up being owned by somebody in Indonesia, and I had to haggle, and I bought it for $1,000 back in 2015. So it's a good domain.
Yeah. No, thanks for the interesting story. I didn't know, like, I wouldn't have guessed it, to be honest with you, because it could have meant a bunch of things, an abbreviation for something else. This is where my mind was going. The S
it's
must
50-50.
Yeah.
It's about 50-50. People are like, obviously it's translator. And then 50% is like, what does it mean? Well, it's translator, but cut there, right?
I'm on the other 50. Yeah. And thanks for that. I really appreciate it. So what is the status of Slater now? Like as you know, today, like everybody, like every entrepreneur, you start from fresh, from zero, and you go through a progression, and you are at a certain stage right now that you're probably much different than when you started in 2013, as you mentioned earlier. So can you give us a little bit of an update on where is the status right now? What is the status right now for Slater?
Sure. So we're a team of 15 people right now, working with also a fair amount of external contractors, researchers. The people that we work with they're very experienced, and they have quite special expertise in lots of these areas. And the localization is very complicated. So, currently we have 4 pillars of the business. One would be the content that you're seeing on the website. That's mostly free. Some of it is paywalled, but mostly free. Then we have the research side of the business, which is some of the reports that we're publishing. So we have like big reports. The most recent one is like a 150-page industry market report that covers everything from A to Z. And then we have events, which used to be in person pre-COVID. Then we did about a dozen remote conferences, which were really successful. And now we're about to go back to in-person in October again with SlaterCon Zurich. And then we have advisory. And advisory is buy and sell side M&A. So basically, if somebody wants to buy an LSP or an LSP wants to sell, they can come to us and we help them find either buyer or seller. And we might speak about this later, there's a bunch of investors that are looking to invest in the space, venture capital, private equity, and everything in between. And we help them understand the industry better. And, eventually if they end up buying, help them, look through what the company does, do something called commercial due diligence, technical due diligence. So content, research, events, and advisory. That's kind of the 4 pillars of the business at the moment.
So you are at 15 people now. You're a well-recognized voice in the industry. Was there a period as you were starting the company, like everybody else, have you seen any challenges? And those challenges, how did you overcome them? And what do you recommend for people, not necessarily who's starting a Slater-like kind of an industry channel, but anybody who's going through an entrepreneurial sort of a soul search, and I want to start my own company? What is the pitfalls that you overcame that you probably recommend for others to pay attention to?
That's a great question. It was all very incremental in our case. I think one of the challenges is generally to stick to your original vision without being completely rigid, right? If you build a business like what we do, which is not like a technology business, like a SaaS business or something that's like VC funded and it needs to scale like within, a year or two, otherwise it dies. I mean, it's basically an SME. It's an advisory consultancy. It's a content firm. So we were able to grow quite well on an incremental basis. So there weren't any major hiccups. The real challenge is to keep the content fresh, to stay really up to date on the industry, and to hire people who are as passionate as you are, as we as founders are about this particular line of business, because not everybody is, right? So it's kind of a niche. But it's fascinating, especially now with AI and all of that. So really the challenge is to find the right people, and then generate enough revenue to retain those people, because those people are sought after everywhere, right? I mean, if you have a knowledge in this industry, production knowledge. You were with an LSP, like with a language service provider. You maybe were on the buy side. You know all the ins and outs. I mean, you have a lot of options. So to be able to, hire these people and retain them, that's a bit of a challenge. And then also the global nature was a challenge, remains a challenge. Now it's something that's a lot easier now than maybe was even 4 or 5 years, maybe 5, 6 years ago with all these tools, right? But I mean, how do you keep a team globally engaged and collaborative and work together? But we never really had like a make or break moment, I think. It was fairly steady kind of growth so far.
Which is I want to say one of the benefits of working in a knowledge base industry where you don't need buildings, you don't need infrastructure, yes, huge infrastructure to put together. If you've got an idea today and you've got, a little bit of a know-how, there's a lot of support around it. You can, as you mentioned earlier, how you got to the Slater Award, you can draw from a lot of expertise who currently work remote. They don't need to be full-time employees of your company. They probably can be remote, part-time, as a needed basis kind of thing. So that knowledge base industry, which we're hosting a panel on this channel coming up. We're hosting a panel discussion on the knowledge base industry, which I think this is where the localization industry fits under that umbrella of the knowledge base industry. And we need to, I personally, I think on the localization side, that part of that metamorphosis, if you will, of the localization industry is to break down some of those, walls around the localization industry being unique kind of thing and put it into the space of that knowledge base industry, especially with the advancement of all the technologies that we're seeing right now. So based on this one, can you comment a little bit on where does the localization industry fit? I know where 20 years ago where the localization industry was fitting. Everybody was thinking like we're unique, we're special, nobody else can do what we do. And today with everything that is being afforded on open source kind of an arrangement, the genie's out of the bottle, basically. So we either play ball with what we have in front of us, or some people are going to go packing, I guess.
Correct. I think one thing that if you look at it really in kind of a decade, with the lens of like decades, I think it went from being something maybe 20 years ago that was quite contained and you could relatively easily draw the borders around, like, okay, this is the translation bit of the language industry, and this is the kind of localization testing and the localization technical support part of the language industry, to now in 2023, it's really like it's grown tremendously. So the pie has gotten a lot bigger, but it's very hard to kind of determine like what do we actually mean when we talk about the localization industry? What is included? What is kind of adjacent? And what is not, right? That's why also some of these market estimates that many people rely on and come to us, come to NIMSY, come to CSA are quite different because, we take a bit of a narrow view, others take a much larger view of the industry. But so for example, like is AI dubbing still part of the localization industry? Like, there's like maybe 150 more or less sophisticated AI dubbing companies out there now. I'm probably exaggerating, but broader point is where do we stand? How does it fit? I think the edges are really, the pie has grown much larger. It's a lot harder to put your finger on what actually is kind of the core of the localization industry. And it's really adopting AI, has adopted it over the past 5 years, like almost no other industry. And that's something that many people here underestimate, like how far we, and I'm referring to we as kind of maybe the traditional part of the translation localization industry, how far we have adopted AI. And AI is, machine translation is AI at the end of the day. I mean, actually, a lot of the origins of today's, even of ChatGPT is actually from machine translation research, right? So we have adopted this to a degree that very few other industries have, and we're operating on 80, 90% AI-driven workflows. So yeah, it's certainly a fascinating industry. It's a fast evolving industry, and you want to make sure that you're up to date and you're not like just stagnating. I mean, that's true for many industries, but in this case, you might miss the boat completely, and some clients may just pull back from you at some point, and you're just not going to be competitive anymore.
So let's take that a step further. The advancement of utilization of AI and the variety of AI application in our industry. And you mentioned earlier that, you deal with investors and people who are coming to our industry, trying to figure out if there's an opportunity for them to make some money. How is this now being viewed, that extra utilization of technology in our industry? If I was an investor coming in and I'm seeing this is a huge transformation. What does that mean in terms of revenue, in terms of profitability? Is there still opportunity here? Yes or no?
Great question. And something that it really depends at what stage these investors are in understanding the industry. So initially, they're all very skeptical and they're like, okay, well, this is going to get automated like in the next couple of weeks, right? I mean, translation, it's basically a solved use case. Like, what are we doing here, right? And there's DeepL, there's Google Translate, there's Microsoft Translator. But then when they're looking a little bit closer, they're seeing, well, but there is like these, 1,000, 2,000 sizable language service providers, and they're still alive and they're still healthy and they're still generating their 5, 10, 15, 20% profit margins, right? It's a very healthy environment. So what's going on here? Why haven't these guys all been disrupted? So they start digging in, and then usually they overcome that hurdle where they're like, well, this is all going to get disrupted, and they feel that the technology is an enabler rather than a full disruptor. And as I said before, like a lot of these language service providers have embraced this, have incorporated it, and they're actually helping their clients, deliver these workflows, because clients are busy, it's complex. How do you integrate all these tools in your workflow? So LSPs are there to help. So back to the investor, they go from like, okay, this is going to get disrupted to, oh, this is interesting. Like maybe there's an opportunity there, to then realizing, well, if you're actually a leader and an early adopter and you're well at executing and implementing these AI models in your day-to-day workflow, and you have a great sales force and you understand your client's business, there is a big market, a big addressable market that's not going to go anywhere. And is in fact, probably because of AI may actually increase a lot, because people's expectations regarding the quality and the volume of multilingual content is only going up. Like people expect everything to be multilingual these days, but there's always going to be a service element to that the LSPs can deliver. So, and as they're going through, then they, some of them end up investing.
Yeah. So based on this one, and I'm not sure if the number is correct, but I heard somewhere that there is around 19,000 companies around the world providing translation services. That tells me, with all what's going on the automation side, on the AI side of the world, that some of those will remain, some of them will not remain unless they do a few things to change. So, or new companies will pop up because
a lot of new companies.
Yeah. So this technology space is really energizing the creative ideas of entrepreneurs to say, "Hey, I see an opportunity here. I'm going to put something together." And it's encouraging also, if you agree with me. I don't know. I've seen an example because I did an interview with Michel Lopez on last week. Actually, it was published last week, and it talks about the transformation of E2F from what he called it legacy to providing services that slightly connected but not really. We're talking about NLP and a few other things. So they went through that transformation of saying, okay, we have something here, but we may have something bigger here, a bigger opportunity here. We need to go through this transition phase, that bridge that gets you from where you are. You need to sustain your legacy business. There's no question about that. There'll always be customers for that, but there'll always be an opportunity in the brand new thing. So what are your thoughts around that transformation, I would say, between what you currently have, and keep an eye on it because the revenue generation is coming from that, and you got to take profitability and invest in new ideas. So that's going to come from somewhere, basically the legacy business.
Absolutely. Actually, we wrote a report on what we call adjacent businesses. So the report's called Finding Growth in Adjacent Services. And what we list there would be things like audio description, captioning, linguistic consulting, data for AI. That's probably what Michel referred to. game testing, staffing, language assessment, transcription. I mean, it could go on, right? Multilingual SEO, sign language interpreting, all of these things. So what a lot of these language service providers, even if they're coming from the core activity of providing translation localization services, what they're extremely good at is solving very specific problems, language challenges for very, very demanding clients using both in-house, but mostly external partners, right? So they understand how to source these qualified linguists or experts. They don't have to be necessarily linguists, right? They understand how to pay them. They have the payment infrastructure in place. They know how to manage deadlines. I mean, project managers are rock stars in this industry. They're basically running the show often, right? They also often really have great sales teams. They understand how to sell into the enterprise. Now, if you can do this for translation and localization, like you can do this for adjacent services as well, some of the ones that I just listed, right? And so, and they're very nimble organizations that can often just go wherever revenue would be generated. So I'm not really worried about a lot of these LSPs, unless they, of course, just stick religiously to whatever they've done for the past 15 years. And at some point, some more nimble player will come in. But the demand here is so vast. If the whole industry, for example, now there's multimedia, there's game testing, there's so many new opportunities that can be tapped. At the essence, as a business leader, the challenge is really deciding like which one of the things you could probably deliver if you want to choose. You can't do everything. Maybe TransPerfect or Lionbridge can, but even they have to maybe sometimes focus a bit.
Yeah. Now, so the extra, I want to say, use of technology in our industry brings up another topic, which is everybody keeps talking about recently, is quality. Have we, and I'm just talking philosophically here because I don't know the statistics on it, to be honest with you. I'm looking, if you have any, have you seen any data, or what's your impression? I guess if there's no data, what's your impression on how the quality is faring out in the use of technology, and have the customer, generally who's the deciding factor of what quality is, in conjunction with the translator, obviously, have they started to forego a little bit of quality for the cheaper, more freely available kind of a translation?
This is such a complicated topic, because you really have to look at the use case, the client, what they try to achieve with the content. If they go fully machine translated, or maybe have an expert in the loop or a human in the loop, or we can just look at it maybe anecdotally. For example, there was the European Union recently, the European Commission decided to start publishing machine translated press releases on the website of the European Commission. Like those are actual just raw machine translation, right? They called it, by the way, a little housekeeping announcement. That's what the guy called it, when the spokesperson. So this to me is almost a bit kind of crossing the Rubicon into a major global institution feeling very comfortable that the quality of machine translation is now good enough for them not to, make a fool of themselves by publishing raw machine translation. They said, well, we're going to, it's only up there for a few hours, and then we're going to have the human translated or human edited version updated. But at the end of the day, people will look at whatever comes out first, right? So there is clearly a tendency of the customers to feel much more comfortable with raw output from a machine translation. Of course, it's highly trained, it's highly curated, it's got the right data, it's trained on that specific type of text from that specific institution. But generally, people feel more comfortable putting this out. That said, though, there's, as a reaction, there's also another part of the market, like the transcreation part of the market, where people are like, well, we can't automate this. We need human creativity. We want to have exceptionally targeted, customized, creative, multilingual content out there, and let's work with in country experts that are going to make sure the message comes across well, etc. So you have kind of that other extreme. That's a market that's also growing. And for example, recently I spoke to senior vice president of ICON, a big clinical research organization. And they have a huge internal team that's running language operations, running translation operations, linguistic validation. Sure, they're using technology, but they need very specific human experts to make sure that the content that they're using in their regulatory environment is 100% accurate. So there's no major kind of driver for them to like cut corners and make it more efficient and put out more words. It's all about quality in that space. So again, it really it depends which part of the industry you're looking at. But generally, there's a tendency to feel more comfortable working with, pure MT content.
Yeah, and there was another anecdote. I don't know if you guys saw that one in Europe. Some lawyer in, I think it was New York, who brought a case to the court, and that case ended up being the whole thing was done by generative AI. And he ended up being, disbarred or something. I don't know what happened to the guy, but it was just, you can't rely.
You gotta be careful. You gotta be careful with this. I mean, this is a whole other thing with this generative AI, with ChatGPT. Like, where's that going, right? And we've been trying to unpack it. There's all these. I mean, now that you can basically at the push of a button, you can create multilingual content from scratch. That was not the case a year ago before ChatGPT. Right. Like you could, but it wasn't really good. Now you can, instead of having to do a translation, you can just say, well, here's my prompt. Please write this in 10 language and the thing will go off. Now, if you look carefully, it's not writing it from scratch fully. I think there's a lot of kind of behind the scenes machine translation going on inside the big black GPT box, right? But it's something that really wasn't that possible. So let's see where that is going. But yeah, I mean, generally, there's just so much content out there, more and more and more, and the demand for it is really high.
I feel like, when somebody says, buys a Tesla and it's self-driving vehicle, and you're on a busy street somewhere, you don't want to I don't know, maybe the car handles it no problem, but your human. I want to say intuition would say, look, I'm not using the self-driving on this road. If it's a straight line highway and there's, not many people cutting me off and, traffic jams, etc., I might trust it. But in a downtown Toronto or downtown Zurich, I'm not pressing that button that says self-driving, because I don't know what's going to come up here and I'm going to end up safe or not safe in that resultingness. It's like anything else. If you rely too much on the tech, for the sake of expediency or cost or whatever it is, it may end up costing you down the road. Because, one another anecdote I'll tell you about it from Canada is the Bay. It's a big retailer here, Hudson Bay Company. They had a advertisement campaign in the Quebec region using, the soccer term, after the international soccer game was finished, GOAT, greatest of all time. And it was actually translated to goat, four-legged goat.
Which one is that? Which one, into French or?
French Canadian, yeah.
I was just waiting for you to stop, and then I would give you the goat anecdote because I read it literally an hour ago. The same happened on a Netflix show with Serena Williams in German. So the German subtitle, I literally read it an hour ago. So it was a Netflix show. She was described as, so basically the sentence was, the GOAT qualified for the second round. And then the subtitle, and I saw a screenshot, was literally, the GOAT, they had a four-legged animal, qualified for the second round. And I mean, it merited an article in, the biggest Swiss, whatever, daily newspaper. And they pinged Netflix, and Netflix was like, yeah, well, sorry. Right.
Yeah, I know.
So, looks like GOAT's a tough one to get right.
Yeah, that's right. So machine translation is not being trained for the goats yet.
They actually said that it wasn't machine translation, which makes it even like machine translation might not have gotten it right either. And so so I guess the point we're making, it's still a challenge, no matter how much technology you're using, right?
Yeah, we use it with caution. That's the message. Use it with caution. Yes, it is available. Yeah, it's out there. And, we haven't touched on the security side of things, the security aspect of your data. If your data is something like very confidential or confidential data of any sort, there's a lot of risk in putting data out there. in any way. So you got to keep an eye on that one from a user perspective. Security element is like everybody's worried now about their data and certain type of data, not all their data. Obviously, there are certain data that you can put out there. That's no problem. But there are some types of data you probably don't want to put in a public space. And that's what it is. Those types of free machines out there. So.
Yeah, you don't want to use that at all. And I mean, that's, you want to sign up to a paid service. And then if it gets very critical, it has to be on-prem. I mean, with ChatGPT, there were some companies that totally shut it down now and just said, look, there's no way. And they're building their internal models, which is, I guess, a huge market for the next 5 years. I mean, in our previous life at CLS, we had some clients in Canada, right? Government clients where you couldn't they wouldn't even send us the documents. We'd have to go there and like translate them on
we still do that, by the way. We still do that.
There you go. So that's like peak security right there.
That's right. Yeah. No electronic transfer.
No.
So for the next part of our conversation is we talk a little bit about what's the vision here? What do you see? What's the future for Slater? And and I know the future of Slater is tied into the future of the industry. Where do you see the future of the industry? And somebody corrected me the other day, and I appreciate the correction, is no more 5-year vision. It's more like 3 months, 6 months, that kind of thing. So it's a very short term, kind of a look down the road kind of thing. So any comments on that?
So for the industry as a whole, I mean, I continue to be quite bullish for those that are able to adapt to it. I mean, I don't want to make this like a commonplace statement, but I think right now is really a difficult time for many providers because they need to decide on the tech side, like, am I just going to pick this tool and build on some of these technologies that are out there and I can sign up to, or am I going to build something myself? If I build something myself that enables me to service my clients better down the road, am I betting on the right horse, or is this thing out of date next year? Is it going to be obsolete and I bet on the wrong technology, right? So for now, my stance is there kind of be a little cautious, maybe almost wait a bit, like observe, but wait. And then, when you see that something is actually might end up winning, then bet on that horse. So I also really encourage LSPs to look beyond their kind of core business and see if there's any other areas, as I just said, that they could start expanding in and build expertise. Because, you don't build like a gaming localization business overnight. I mean, LimeRich would know a thing about that too, right? I mean, you guys have been at this for a long time and successfully so. These things take a bit of time. For Slater, I think we can do just more of what we do now. I think we're quite well set up. We have a pretty powerful subscription offering and engine. It was not trivial to build like a subscription business that actually works. You would think that's easy in the times of Substack and all of these offerings, but actually to have a fairly complicated kind of information business website that people can subscribe to in different tiers was not trivial to build, and now we have it. So we can just load a lot more intelligence and information onto that platform and sell it. We're going to go back to in-person conferencing. I personally try to capture more of these emerging new companies, which is not super easy. We actually launched the Slater 50 under 50 list about 4 months ago, and we're going to do another one in 2024. That's 50 companies under 50 months. That's the best we could come up with. So we're trying to capture these new emerging companies because there's so many, especially right now. There's so many. There's literally hundreds of new, what I call language AI companies that are using parts of this very powerful kind of technological base that's coming now with these, generative AI systems and are trying to make a product or a service on top of it. So there's a lot of movement among these new companies, whether many of them might not succeed, but we're trying to capture some of that. So I'm really interested in covering these more actively than we do now, while kind of course, keep our core audience informed and engaged. Yeah.
That's right. And it doesn't, like, you bring on a very good topic. It doesn't need to mean the end of the what we used to do in the translation world, right? It means the new beginning, transformation, and that's what business is all about. Business in general is about being agile, have the ability to transform your business if there's a brand new idea or a brand new business idea that you probably need to venture into. And the lucky part of it is that we're not a manufacturing industry, right? We're not a construction industry. We're not building ships. We're in a knowledge-based industry. It's like acquiring the skills and the know-how and putting a service around it. I mean, to me, it should be a straightforward kind of a proposition here. It is not that difficult to retool. And I live not far away. Where I live in Toronto, I'm not far away from the Ford assembly plant where they assemble the cars. So the plant needs to shut down if they bring in a new model. So they're going to bring a new model to assemble in the plant. They shut down the plant like for a couple of weeks to retool, to make sure that the plant is ready to accept the new model to be assembled. We're not in that industry. I mean, you do things in parallel. It doesn't require a lot of investment in the grand scheme of thing. In our industry, like size-wise, I mean, it is not that big of an industry when you compare to other industries, to the health and life sciences industry or the automotive industry. We're still in the 60 kind of $1 billion industry, where meanwhile, other industries are, much, much, much larger than that. It's growing. There's a need for it. It is important. People can't probably process or do things without it. And that's a great thing. I mean, if I go back 2 decades, I can recall times when people were saying, I don't need to translate that, but you're shipping your product to Germany. The German user probably cannot speak English or read English. They were satisfied by shipping a user manual with a machine to Germany with no German translation. Today, that's not possible. So the industry and, conversations such as this one have brought a huge awareness to either producers, suppliers, knowledge-based, et cetera, that you cannot do business without having a component of languages in your business, which is great.
And the whole technology boom at the moment is going to make this a lot more important than expected on the part of the consumer, right? They're going to be like, well, what do you mean there is no version in my language? What do you mean this website's not in my language? Oh, it should be, right? I mean, because it's possible and because costs have come down, like per unit costs have come down. And, that means, again, volumes are going to go up and people's expectations in a quality localized product are going to continue to go up. And you mentioned the asset component, like LSPs are quite asset light or very, very asset light. So it's very rare to see, for example, an LSP go bankrupt because you can always scale down or up no matter how much demand there is, right? So you have to be something really unexpected has to happen for you to
That's right.
Go out of business with an LSP.
Yeah, most of the cost that an LSP business runs is controllable cost. Their fixed cost is not that much, to be honest with you. Computers and networks. And in today's world, I'm not sure if many people that probably still gave up their offices, or maybe some people still do have their offices, but they probably shrunk their square footage quite a bit because of the remote working, right? And I'm assuming, that entire COVID phase that we went through, that the industry has discovered that you probably do not need your talents to live within 15 kilometers from your office. They can live anywhere as long as they're connected to your network. So therefore, they saved a lot of money on office space, and the employees or the contractor that they're working with, they don't need to go to an office. So they saved a whole bunch of frustration commuting. So
I mean, you kind of look back at the way it was like 15 years ago and you wonder, like, who thought it was a good idea, like for an LSP to bring people into a centralized office, sit down, switch on a computer and then translate for 8 or 9 hours. And they're like, oh, okay, bye everyone, and go back home. It's like, why was this ever a good idea? Like, unless you really appreciate having lunch with your colleagues, like there was almost zero upside in being at an office.
And you're very limited. Like you either have to, if let's say you establish a company in a certain district around the world, like you are looking for employees within the zone that they can drive to your office.
Yeah.
And this is very limiting, in my opinion, because what happened if the skills that you're looking for are outside the district where you live or where you work? Well, you can't hire those. So it's a limiting factor to your business now. But you're seeing now it doesn't matter where they are, they're hiring people across the globe based on their needs, based on the skills, based on where they need them to be in terms of their business cycle. So if I need somebody who translate to Japanese, that's always been the case on a freelance basis, but on an internal basis, hiring them as a full-time employees, now you can hire them in Japan. They don't need to be in your office.
Yeah, and you can even have you don't even need to set up an office in these countries. Like there's these so-called employer of record, which we're also using at Slator to hire people full-time. So you don't need to set up an office in Japan or in Korea or in Spain or wherever. You can just go through one of these employers of record. I mean, the most popular ones would be like remote.com or deal.com. And then there's a few others where you can just hire people, like they get a full-time, I mean, they got all the social security, a proper package and etc. You don't need to set up an office in some of these more complicated jurisdictions. And so that's something that really didn't exist that much 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah. Well, it's very good to walk through the progression of our industry with you and connecting with you. I miss talking to you outside of the podcast or on the podcast. It doesn't matter to me as long as I connect with the people I worked with before, such as yourself. I'm talking to Mark in about an hour. You know, Mark Schreiner, you know Mark, right?
Oh, of course I know Mark. Yeah. He also has a podcast. He has a couple of podcasts, and I had the pleasure to be there, a guest as well. So he was on mine too. So. Oh,
was he? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, I want to put a plug for SlaterCon in Zurich that's coming up, and your podcast, which I subscribe to as well. SlaterPod, I think it's called.
That's right.
And SlaterCon in Zurich. For those who are listening to our show today, please consider it. Please consider attending in person. It has been a while since this industry has gotten together in person, and it will be a great time to see each other in person, exchange some ideas and knowledge all together. At the end, I want to thank Florian for being with me today. I really appreciate your time, Florian, and thanks for this lovely conversation. It was 9 o'clock this morning. It was a great start of my day, and now I feel energized for the rest of the weekend. Thanks so much for being on the call, on the show with me. Thanks for taking part of this conversation. I invite you anytime. Mikasa is Sukasa. You can drop by anytime and tell a story if you like. Although we're a young channel, we're almost 40,000 views on YouTube, and wow. It's great. So we only started a few months ago in end of March. So it's gaining traction, and I'm happy about that. And it gives me pleasure to be able to do things I really like to do, is to talk to professionals such as yourself who share the passion for the industry. And it doesn't matter who, at the end of the day, what's the intent cause of this. I think it's positive. I think it's sending a very positive message to everybody, but because we're sharing information, we're sharing knowledge, and at the same time, we're encouraging people to do things a little differently to be successful. So I appreciate your time with me this morning.
Thanks so much for having me, Robin.
And for the audience, thanks so much for listening. I really appreciate it. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to our channel and look us up on all your favorite podcast streaming networks. We exist on all of them. And thank you again for listening, and we'll see you next time. I appreciate it.